I want to have speech bubbles in my Blender scene, but I don't want to model them each time. Has this ever happened to you? Well, do I have the solution for you? Introducing Procedural Speech Bubbles, a Geometry Nose powered solution to nearly all of your speech bubble needs. Just like any other add-on, you go into the Add-ons tab and import the zip file. So, your add-on is installed now, so you open the speech bubble panel and you will see lots of buttons. I haven't figured out how to add drop-down menus, and I've done enough coding already, I don't want to do any more. So if you click on the Append Bubble button, it'll do just that, it will append the bubble. However, if you have a camera in the scene, it automatically appends the bubble in the view of the camera, and the bubble also tracks to the camera automatically, and you don't have to do anything. These two vector inputs control where the ball and this empty automatically paste into. This is only really useful if you're automating a speech bubble where it's always in the same location and you don't want to move it every single time. You might also notice that it has some scale keyframes. So on the current frame, the scale is 1, and 20 frames before, the scale is 0. This just speeds up the process of animating it in. You can turn this off or change how long it takes to come in using these inputs. And this is for new bubbles, it won't change the duration on the bubbles that are already appended. This small empty is what the arrow points to. So you can move this to the mouth of your character and it will always point to that. And you don't tend to interact with this arrow empty, so I tend to hide it. But this is the one that actually tracks to the spherical empty. So these circle empties are parented to the arrow empty, which tracks to the spherical empty. And they allow you to change the shape of the arrow. And if you want to make the arrow thicker, you just select the mesh itself and press S. So since metaballs can't be edited with Geometry Nose, you have to instance it inside of a mesh object, and this causes some complications, such as the mesh version having to be in front. This was done so that it can be selected easily without selecting the metaball. This doesn't mean that it will appear in front of objects, it's just selection. However, it does mean that you can select it through any object, so that might cause a bit of confusion. So this large empty is secretly the metaball, and everything is parented to it. So you can grab this to move the bubble and move everything around. If you select the mesh bubble and go into the modifiers panel, you will find lots of stuff that lets you mess around with the emotions and other cool effects. In the same panel, I do have presets for these inputs for their emotions. So you don't really need to learn what these inputs do, but I'll go through them just in case you want to make your own variations and want to edit it yourself. From the top, Objects allows you to change which object is instanced. This would be useful if you wanted more complex shapes. Text length is something I will come back to. Segments allows you to change the density of the polygons in the bubble. 0 is maximum density and 1 is minimum. I know it's a bit unintuitive, but that's just how metaballs are. Spiky on/off does what it says in the tin. It allows you to turn off the spikes, but keeps all the settings how they were. Probability allows you to change the probabilities that a face will become a spike. Face size is useful for thought bubbles. Make sure to turn vertex crease off when doing this. Subdiff smooths out the spikes. Vertex crease makes a subdivided mesh pointy again. This is why larger face sizes look weird with it turned on. Merge by distance affects the base mesh before the spikes are applied. And since metaballs have quite bad topology, there are some very small faces that make thin spikes. This fixes that issue, but sometimes this causes other issues, so you can turn it off. Not all the spikes are the same height, and this is controlled by noise. So noise scale allows you to change how different the heights of the spikes are to their neighbouring spikes. Noise rotation allows you to animate the height of the spikes. The presets do this by having a keyframe at 0 and 1 and having linear extrapolation. Keep this in mind when animating it, that there are already some keyframes already there. From min changes how close the spikes are to the maximum and minimum heights. This means that 1 will make all the spikes the minimum height, and 0 will make all the spikes more random and closer to the maximum height. 2min changes the minimum height, and 2max changes the maximum height. This next section is about turning the area into spheres, like you would see in a thought bubble. So the number of thoughts changes how many spheres there are, and scale minimum changes how small the smallest sphere is. The cool spike effects is a place where I put random effects that I found in my testing. Bubble spin simply rotates the bubble. This is useful for changing the direction of other effects that you'll see later on. Add an unedited bubble is useful because if a spike goes inwards, the unedited bubble will kind of hide it. Pulled back is useful for characters in motion. It's also an example of where the spikes might go inwards, so adding the unedited bubble fixes it. Spike spin rotates the spikes. This might be useful if the character is spinning, or to add emphasis to the text. Snap does a similar thing to pulled back, but it's a bit different and only tends to look good with a high density of spikes. And finally, epsilon allows you to stop the front faces from becoming spikes. To get multiple bubbles that connect to each other, simply select the text and the large empty, Shift D to duplicate it, and move it to the desired place. That's it. Click on the text and go to the modifiers panel. Here you can paste your text into the text box. The text box size is quite self-explanatory. The text type length lets you animate the appearance of the text. The driver is controlled by the input in the modifiers panel of the mesh bubble. This means that when you have multiple bubbles connected, the text can follow from one bubble to the next. However, you might notice that both bubbles reveal at the same time. That's where the text before length comes in. Put the character count of the previous bubble in, and it waits until the text type length is that many characters until it starts revealing. Quick summary, I've got a camera. I want the speech bubble to appear on frame 20. So I open the speech bubbles panel, append bubble. It appears in the view of the camera and is tracking to it, which even means that if I move the camera, the text will still be readable. I want to change this text to something that I've got. There we go. So then I want to animate it. So on this frame, I want it to be at 0, and then insert a keyframe. Frame 70, let's go with 50, insert a keyframe, and then that means that it comes in and the text starts coming out. Perfect. If I want to change the emotion, I can use one of the presets here. I'm going to go with normal, or you can change the settings here. If you want multiple bubbles that kind of attach to each other, you can select the text and the large empty, duplicate them, and then on the text, put in your new text. And I know that this bubble, the first one, is 50 characters long. I'm going to put 50 into there. So then going back to here, 70 plus 50 is 120. So on this, I want it to be character 100. Here we go. So then that carries over from one bubble to the next. That's about it. If you're curious about the characters at the start, they're from my TV show that I'm in the process of making, and they're dressed like that for lore reasons. Okay, it's for a reason, trust me. It'll make sense in a few years when that episode comes out. I'd like to give a big thanks to ChatGPT for helping me to code this. You're a bit of a pain to work with, but we did get there in the end. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this and find it useful. See ya!